Let me briefly talk about Lourdes. Lourdes, as I mentioned earlier, was the mid-1800s with Bernadette. I've been blessed to go there a couple of times, and you can see just tons of canes and wheelchairs and things that people have left after they explained miraculous healings. And the church is real tough about documenting a healing. It's got to be something like there was no bone for that bar in the arm, and all of a sudden there is bone. I mean, it has to be beyond any hesitation. They have a lot of skeptical doctors and physicians who serve on their boards, but there are many documented healings. And so Lourdes kind of represents God's love and mercy. Fatima in Portugal occurs 60 years later at the end of World War I. And Fatima is more of a proof of God's existence and God's justice. Because at Fatima she appears to 3 young visionaries, a total of 6 times, May 13th through August 13th. And in July she gives a series of prophecies to one of the visionaries named Lucia, who just passed away this past February. She was 90-something. And those prophecies were that World War I would end, but if mankind did not return to God, there would be a worse Second World War during the pontificate of a certain named Pope, which became World War II. Many countries would be annihilated, the Holy Father would suffer much, etc., etc. And Fatima is honored on May 13th, and on May 13th, 1981, our first Pope behind Iron Curtain, John Paul II, the assassination attempt occurred to try to kill him, because you can see through the balance of the 80s after that assassination attempt, he had Poland, and then in the rest of the countries behind the Iron Curtain, which by the end of the 1980s had given rise to the absolute disappearance of the Soviet Union without a shot. And we talk about President Reagan. Yes, he played a role, but it was really the Holy Father and the spark that he lit in Poland. And they say now he was really the Pope about which Our Lady spoke about at Fatima. The final thing I want to mention about Fatima is the children pleaded with Our Lady for some sign of her presence. And so she promised on October 13th, 1917, there would be a great miracle. And the word spread not only throughout Europe, but even to America, and a lot of newspaper people from around the world, atheists, skeptics, believers, 70,000 of them gathered in this little place for October 13th, 1917. And what occurred is called the Great Miracle of the Sun. And the ones you want to read describing it are the atheists who converted on the spot, because it was a cold, rainy, cloudy time. The appointed time of this miracle was noon. It was now 1 in the afternoon. Everybody was yelling at the kids. She hadn't appeared. It looked like the whole thing was a fraud. And all of a sudden, the children said, there she is. The clouds parted. The sun started spinning, sending off rays of colors. Then it looked like it was going to crash to earth. 70,000 people hit the mud, were screaming, praying, changing their life. The sun went back into its spot. No more colors, no more spinning. Everyone was converted, and everything was perfectly dry as if it had never rained. And again, if you had people that were big believers telling you this from the beginning, that's one thing. But you can read the accounts of the people that went to make fun of it, and there was, in fact, a great miracle of the sun. And I will tell you, when I was in Medjugorje, because this is something you don't do, and growing up in Amarillo with that dry air, you don't look at the sun more than a second. I was walking from one village to the other. I was in a very prayerful mood, and I suddenly had the sense to look at the sun. And I turned and I looked at the sun, and I started to watch and see it spin and throw off colors. And about 5 minutes later, it concluded. And just like that episode in my bedroom, it was not, I wasn't scared. And I was at total peace, and I was given the blessing of seeing the miracle of the sun. Now, let me tell y'all something. I've described some things that have happened to me. This is nothing to brag about. There is a famous line in Scripture, "Blessed are those who believe and do not see." It is not anything to brag about that you were so far from God that God had to intervene as dramatically as it's done in my life, and perhaps even in Medjugorje, to be given that grace of seeing the sun might have been a real statement that I need things like that for my faith. All right? Things like that don't happen anymore, and I hope I'm mature enough that I don't need them. But I was given that blessing, as a lot of pilgrims were, and you'll constantly hear people that go to Medjugorje come back and tell you things like that happen.